My name is Ursula, I'm 46, and I thought my husband was away on a simple business trip. Then, late one evening, a live stream popped up on my phone, showing him having a romantic dinner with another woman. One look, and my whole life shifted. I'm sharing this because betrayal doesn't just sting, it transforms you. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, emotional courage, and personal justice. I never expected a single notification to shake my entire world, but life has a habit of surprising you when you least expect it. That night started like any other Tuesday. I had just finished washing the dishes, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, something I'd started drinking recently to help with the stress that had been creeping into my days. The house felt too quiet. My husband, Mark, was supposed to be on a business trip in Cincinnati. He'd left early that morning, kissing me on the forehead and reminding me he'd be busy with back-to-back meetings. I remember nodding, half asleep, accepting his explanation because it was the same one he always used. But that night, as I watched the steam rise from my mug, my phone buzzed with a message from an old coworker. I almost didn't check it. I thought it was going to be a harmless, "How are you?" or maybe a meme. Instead, I saw 5 words that made my stomach drop. "Isn't this Mark with someone?" Below it was a link, simple, blue, unassuming. And yet, somehow, it looked dangerous. I hesitated for a moment before tapping it. The screen went black, then loaded into a live stream tag from a small restaurant downtown. The angle was wide, the quality grainy, but clear enough to recognize faces. There he was, Mark, sitting in a dimly lit booth, leaning in toward a woman I had never seen before. Not a co-worker I recognized, not a client, not someone from the neighborhood. A younger woman, maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair pinned loosely behind her ears and a smile that stretched softly across her face. The camera caught the two of them laughing, and not just laughing, smiling the way people smile when they feel something warm and secret between them. My heart didn't just drop, it froze. I looked closer, hoping I was wrong. I wanted the truth to be something else, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe someone who looked like him. But then Mark reached across the table and touched the woman's wrist gently. He used the same soft gesture he'd used years earlier when we first started dating, the small, tender movement that used to make my chest flutter. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed until I couldn't breathe. I hit pause on the video, staring at the frozen image. The woman's head was tilted toward him. Mark's eyes were softened, relaxed, in a way I hadn't seen in a while. He wasn't even wearing his wedding ring. My fingers shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. For a moment, my mind couldn't wrap itself around what I was seeing. The room felt too quiet, the hum of the refrigerator too loud. Everything seemed wrong. I blinked several times, almost expecting the image to disappear, like some cruel trick of the light. Maybe it's old. I whispered to myself. But in the corner of the screen, the live stream timestamp blinked in bright white numbers. Live, 7:52 p.m. Less than 10 minutes ago, a wave of heat washed over me, followed by a cold rush that made my hands numb. I sat there, staring, unable to move. My thoughts scattered in every direction. Anger, confusion, sadness, disbelief. Nothing fit neatly. Nothing made sense. I pressed play again. Slowly, the restaurant looked quiet, the kind of place couples go when they want privacy. The lighting was soft, the tables spaced far apart, and the waiters moved around with practiced ease. I could hear faint clinking of dishes and low conversations, everyday sounds that suddenly felt foreign. The woman leaned forward with a small laugh, covering her mouth as if Mark had just said something sweet. Then Mark smiled back, an expression so familiar it made my throat tighten. I felt a sting behind my eyes. The Mark in front of that camera didn't look tired from traveling. He didn't look stressed or preoccupied. He looked comfortable, relaxed, present in a way he hadn't been with me in months. I paused the video again and set the phone on the table. I needed a moment to think, but my mind refused to slow down. It raced from memory to memory, digging up small moments I had dismissed. Times he came home later than usual. Nights, he said, he had a quick dinner with the team. Occasions when he guarded his phone more closely. Was this what those moments really were? I placed both hands on the edge of the table and inhaled slowly. I expected myself to cry, but tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a dull ache grow heavier in my chest, an ache that told me something inside me was shifting. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere in the distance. Everything looked normal, but inside my home, normal had vanished like a blown-out candle. After a minute, I walked back and grabbed my phone again. I needed answers. I needed to understand the full picture before I confronted anyone. I replayed the live stream, inspecting every detail. The way Mark leaned forward, the small smile lines around his mouth when he joked, the way his hands moved when he talked. Then I noticed something subtle but important. He was wearing the same shirt he had worn when he left that morning. He hadn't changed at all. It was almost as if he had gone straight to dinner instead of the conference. I rewound the video and checked again. Same navy button-down. Same faint wrinkle near the collar. My stomach twisted. I reached for my laptop and opened the airline app we always used for booking. Mark usually forwarded me his itinerary, even if just out of habit. This time, he hadn't said anything. That alone was strange. But I searched his frequent flyer account anyway. No flights booked for the past 3 weeks. I leaned back in the chair, letting the truth settle slowly, painfully. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't work-related. It wasn't innocent. This was intentional. Mark had lied, and not just about a meeting, but an entire trip. For a moment, I felt something sharp inside me. Not anger, something colder, something steady. A realization that the man I trusted had stepped into a world of secrets when he walked out that front door this morning. I opened the live stream again, letting it play in the background as I gathered old receipts, checked email confirmations, and reopened text threads that suddenly felt suspicious. The more I looked, the more the truth unfolded like a paper I had tried not to read. There were gaps in his stories, small details he had brushed off, times he had said he needed space to focus. Even weekends, he claimed he was tied up with early morning meetings. I sat there for nearly half an hour, gathering pieces, connecting dots, trying to understand how I missed all of it. Then, suddenly, a waiter stepped into the live stream frame, blocking Mark and the woman for a moment. When he moved, I saw something that made me sit straighter. Mark was pouring wine for her, and she looked touched, her eyes shining a little in the candlelight. That's when something clenched tightly inside me. Not because of the romance, not because of the smile she gave him, but because he used to do that for me. On our anniversary dinners, on quiet evenings when he wanted to make things special. The memory felt like it belonged to some other life. I reached out and locked my phone, needing just a few seconds of blankness. But when I set the phone down, my hand brushed across the table, and I realized I had been gripping it so tightly that my knuckles had turned pale. I took a slow breath, then another. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think clearly, not out of fear, but because reacting wildly wouldn't help me. I wasn't that kind of person. I was steady. I was patient. I always had been. That steadiness is what helped me now. Instead of calling Mark or sending an angry message, I opened my laptop again and searched for the restaurant. I checked its website, read reviews, and discovered something important. The place had recently started using a public live stream feature for ambience and safety, according to a note on their homepage. My heart skipped. This wasn't some private video. Anyone could access it. That meant this wasn't someone spying. This wasn't an invasion of privacy. This was simply the truth, already out there. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not out of fear, but clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. The odd behavior, the distance, the excuses. It all led to this moment. I watched the live stream one last time before closing my laptop. Mark leaned in, brushing a piece of hair behind the woman's ear in a way that felt far too intimate. She blushed. He smiled. And in that moment, the last bit of denial slipped away. I whispered to myself, "This changes everything." And it did, because while I didn't yet know what I would do, I knew life wouldn't go back to the way it was before I clicked that link. The house was still when Mark walked through the door that night. The soft click of the lock echoed against the walls, making me tense in ways I hadn't anticipated. He didn't notice my expression as he entered, carrying the same briefcase and rolled-up papers he always did when he returned from a trip. But this time, I noticed everything. Every detail seemed amplified. The faint creases in his shirt, the way he adjusted his tie absent-mindedly, the casual hum he made when he stepped into the kitchen. Normally, these small movements would have gone unnoticed. Tonight, they screamed contradictions. "Hey, honey," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His voice sounded tired, but not the exhausted kind that came from traveling. More like the kind of tired you get after an evening of amusement. My stomach knotted, and I barely managed a nod in response. I forced a calmness I didn't feel, careful not to let him suspect I had seen the live stream. I needed him to reveal himself naturally, to show me the cracks in his stories without prompting. He dropped his bag and began unpacking small items, papers, pens, his laptop charger, arranging them on the dining table as if the routine could somehow hide the distance between us. I sat on the couch, holding my tea, but not drinking, listening as he talked about meetings, deadlines, and a conference that supposedly went late into the evening. Every word he said sounded rehearsed. Every sentence seemed designed to confirm a story I no longer trusted. "I had a client dinner tonight," he said casually, pulling a small notebook from his bag. "Nothing special, just some follow-ups." His eyes flickered toward me for a fraction of a second, searching perhaps for reassurance. I didn't give it. I didn't even blink. I let the words hang in the air like smoke, letting him reveal himself in the rhythm of his lies. I watched him closely as he spoke, noticing how he avoided certain topics, the dinner he mentioned, the timing of his supposed meetings, even the way he referenced the city he claimed to have been in. Small inconsistencies, almost imperceptible unless you were paying attention. And tonight I was. For the first time in months, I was truly seeing him. Each omission, each hesitation became a piece of a puzzle that no longer made me feel safe in my own home. After he moved to the living room to check emails, I quietly took out my laptop. I had a faint hope, somewhere deep inside, that I might be overreacting, that maybe he wasn't entirely dishonest. But as I logged into the shared accounts we sometimes used, I noticed patterns that had once seemed harmless. Travel confirmations that never came. Meeting schedules that were missing or strangely empty. Messages I had dismissed as spam or overlooked reminders suddenly felt like deliberate gaps. I started cross-referencing times, dates, and locations, a silent detective in my own home, uncovering pieces of a story that refused to be ignored. The first small shock came from his emails. A flight confirmation he had forwarded me, something I had filed automatically, didn't match the ticket in the airline's system. No record existed. Not in the airline app, not in his email, not in any itinerary confirmation he had ever shown me. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a minor oversight or forgetfulness. This was deliberate, and it explained the live stream. It explained the long meeting nights. It explained the way he had distanced himself without giving any reason that truly made sense. I closed the laptop with a soft snap, taking a moment to breathe. My thoughts were spiraling, yet focused. I couldn't confront him blindly. I needed corroboration. I needed confirmation from someone who could shed light without immediately escalating tension. That's when I remembered Tessa, the woman in the live stream. I had never met her, but her presence in his life was now undeniable. I had her name from a small detail he had casually mentioned in passing, something he assumed I wouldn't notice. But I did, and I had access to the company directory. It took hours to draft a message to her, not accusatory, not confrontational, carefully worded, gentle, a soft inquiry to gauge her awareness of the situation, a subtle way to understand if she knew the truth or if she, too, was being misled. I pressed send and immediately felt both anxious and guilty. It wasn't that I doubted her integrity. I doubted myself for taking this step. Yet, if I didn't, I might never truly understand the full scope of the deception. While waiting for a response, I observed Mark again. He didn't suspect a thing, sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, humming quietly. I noticed the tension in his jaw when a notification popped up. It wasn't his usual relaxed smile. Something flickered, an almost imperceptible moment of fear or annoyance, but he quickly masked it, returning to casual conversation as though nothing had happened. I wondered for the first time in years what he was capable of hiding, what he could live with, and how long he had been perfecting this act. Tessa's reply came just after midnight. She wrote with cautious honesty, revealing small fragments that pieced together months of carefully crafted lies. He had told her I was basically out of the marriage, that he had been planning for a change, phrases that twisted my stomach into knots. Each word she typed felt like a soft punch, the kind that leaves lingering pain long after the initial strike. But within that same reply, there was a hint of confusion from her side. She hadn't realized he was still maintaining the illusion at home. She didn't know, she said, that he had presented himself as committed, dutiful, responsible. I felt a strange mix of relief and despair. Relief because she hadn't been complicit in outright deceit. Despair because Mark had weaponized both of us against each other without either of us being aware. The hours that followed were a blur. I cross-checked text messages, emails, and social media interactions. Every small detail began to coalesce into a picture I couldn't unsee. The excuses he had made, the stories he had told, the little white lies that had once seemed trivial, all of them were connected, and each one revealed not just deception, but intent. Mark had deliberately constructed a narrative that painted him as a dedicated husband while secretly living a double life. It wasn't just betrayal, it was meticulous, calculated manipulation. By early morning, I was exhausted but more determined than I had ever been. The house was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch, and for the first time, I allowed myself to watch him closely without the cloud of denial. There was the same easy smile I remembered from our early days, the same small quirks I had once adored. But now, all of it felt hollow. I couldn't feel warmth when I looked at him. I only felt the weight of knowledge, of a truth I could never unlearn. I needed to act carefully, not out of anger, at least not yet, but out of a desire to protect myself, to reclaim some sense of control. I began documenting everything, noting timestamps, screenshots, and observations. Each piece added to a growing evidence map that I could later rely on. I didn't want confrontation to be reckless. I wanted clarity first, control second. Small, almost imperceptible signs of his deceit emerged in the following days. He came home late from meetings, but the receipts he left behind didn't align with his story. A restaurant he claimed to have dined in for business actually had him on a reservation list for 2 the previous evening. Each lie, each discrepancy added layers to the betrayal, making it impossible to ignore. I realized that what I had stumbled upon through the live stream wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern repeated with precision over weeks, maybe months. One afternoon, I found myself standing by the kitchen sink, staring at my reflection in the window. The face that stared back at me was unfamiliar in some ways, yet determined. I recognized the woman who had tolerated small disappointments and white lies for years. But now, I also recognized a new version, a version capable of facing the truth without flinching, a version that wouldn't allow deception to continue unchallenged. I breathed deeply, feeling the mix of fear, anger, and clarity that came with waking fully to reality. Mark continued to act normally, unaware that I had entered this new state. He spoke casually about trivial matters, groceries, the car, a neighbor's new dog, while the reality of his betrayal hung like a heavy cloud in the room. I listened, nodding quietly, pretending to focus on mundane things while internally cataloging every inconsistency. The mental inventory was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't lost. I was observing, calculating, and reclaiming the narrative he had tried to control. Even interactions outside the house became a challenge. I met with friends, smiled politely, and shared surface-level conversation, all while my mind replayed fragments of his lies. Every time Mark called or texted, my stomach twisted with tension, but I refused to act impulsively. I was no longer the woman who ignored red flags. I was deliberate, careful, intentional. In one small but telling incident, I received a package addressed to Mark. Inside was a small, personalized gift, something from the woman in the live stream. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of its significance. Not just a gift, but proof, evidence that the double life I had glimpsed was real. I didn't open it immediately. I left it in the kitchen drawer, a quiet reminder that the truth was unavoidable. Each day, the lies he had told weren't just words. They were objects, actions, and evidence that surrounded me in ways I could no longer ignore. By the end of that week, I had pieced together a timeline that would have stunned anyone who read it. Each lie, each omission, each manipulated truth built a map of deceit, so clear it was almost painful to confront. And yet, in that clarity, I found a strange sense of empowerment. I knew the magnitude of the betrayal, but I also knew I had the tools to respond thoughtfully. I wasn't powerless. I was aware. And that awareness gave me strength. Late one evening, I sat in the living room, notebook in hand, carefully listing every lie I had discovered. I didn't write them in anger or revenge, but in precision. Each entry documented time, place, action, and consequence. It became almost meditative, a method to process both the emotional devastation and the practical reality of the situation. I was creating a record, a personal ledger of truth that would guide my next steps. And as I wrote, I realized something important. I didn't need to confront him immediately. I didn't need to yell or fight. I only needed clarity, patience, and strategy. The lies beneath the surface were no longer invisible. I had seen them, and seeing them changed everything. I sat in the dim glow of my living room, my notebook open, the page filled with neat lines of evidence, timestamps, and observations. Each entry a small nail in the coffin of deception Mark had built so carefully. My heart beat steadily, but my mind was racing. For days, I had been methodical, patient, careful, piecing together the lies, cataloging every moment of his duplicity. And now, as I sipped lukewarm tea, the live stream from the restaurant appeared again on my laptop screen. The red live indicator blinked steadily in the corner, almost taunting me. Mark had gone out, supposedly late to a client dinner. His phone had been left on the kitchen counter, casually charging, and I knew he wouldn't notice if I picked it up. But I didn't. I didn't want to touch anything yet. I simply stared at the screen. There they were again. Mark and Tessa, the way they leaned into each other, the subtle brush of hands, the soft laughter. I could see the details clearly this time. The way Tessa's hair fell just over her shoulder, the small laugh she muffled behind her hand, and the way Mark's eyes crinkled in a way that had once been reserved only for me. It was painfully ordinary, yet shockingly intimate. Ordinary in its humanity, but extraordinary in its betrayal. I felt a strange mixture of rage and cold detachment. Rage at him for the deceit, and detachment because I had seen the evidence. There was no turning back to a naive trust. I leaned closer to the laptop. My finger hovered over the mouse, knowing what I could do, but pausing. My mind raced with possibilities. This was not just about confrontation. This was about clarity, about exposing the truth in a way that he could no longer manipulate. Then it clicked. The company group chat. The internal Slack channel Mark used daily, full of coworkers, supervisors, and even higher management. I had access. As the HR coordinator, I could post. I didn't need to fabricate anything. I didn't need to lie. The live stream existed. It was public. It was evidence. And it could finally meet the audience that mattered, the people who knew him professionally, who trusted him, who would be shocked just as I had been. I hesitated for only a heartbeat. The weight of the decision pressed against my chest. This was not just exposing his personal betrayal. It could have professional consequences, ripple effects he hadn't anticipated. But the thought of him believing he could continue undetected made my resolve harden. I could not allow this to fester any longer. With a steady hand, I copied the link to the live stream. My heart thumped with a mix of fear and adrenaline. I opened the company group chat, a space that usually contained mundane announcements, project updates, and casual jokes. For the first time in years, I would be using it as a witness to truth. I typed nothing. I simply pasted the link. My finger hovered over send, and then I pressed it. Immediately, the quiet hum of the office seemed to awaken in my mind. I imagined coworkers' faces lighting up as the feed loaded, their reactions shifting from curiosity to shock. Within seconds, messages began to appear. Wait, is that him? Oh, my God, is that Mark? No way. He's supposed to be in Cincinnati. I watched as Mark's name became the center of attention, the object of disbelief. A subtle smile touched my lips, not from satisfaction or cruelty, but from the sheer justice of truth revealing itself. For so long, he had believed he could control the narrative. Now, every colleague who had interacted with him in good faith was seeing the real story unfold. Mark walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, his eyes narrowing as he noticed my laptop open and the unusual quiet on my part. Ursula, what are you doing? His voice was calm at first, measured, but there was a sharp edge I could detect. Panic had started to seep into the rhythm of his words. I didn't answer. I simply leaned back, fingers interlaced, watching the reactions pour into the chat window. The messages were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and whispered confirmations. Several coworkers posted screenshots of their screens, captions like, "This can't be real," And I can't believe he's doing this while on a supposed business trip. Mark's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, voice rising. What did you do? I showed the truth. I said, steady, deliberate. It's right there for everyone to see. No embellishment. No lies. Just you. His eyes widened in disbelief. You can't. This is private. You can't just. It's not private when you've been lying for months. I interrupted. You chose to create this deception. I'm simply letting the people around you witness it. He shook his head, pacing in the living room. You don't understand. You can't post something like this at work. My career, my reputation. And you don't understand, I said, voice firm, almost whispering, that your choices have consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone you've involved in this mess. Mark's eyes darted between me and the laptop screen, his panic growing with every incoming message ping. He reached for the keyboard, as though he could somehow retract reality with the tap of a key, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said. He froze, eyes wide, a strange mixture of disbelief and fear. You'll ruin me, he hissed. No, I said softly, almost kindly. You've been doing that yourself for a long time. I'm just showing it to the people who should know. In that moment, I noticed small shifts in the live stream itself. The camera caught his every gesture, every laugh, every tilt of his head toward Tessa. She reached for a fork, and he instinctively held it in his hand as if to guide it toward her plate. The intimacy of the moment was almost unbearable to witness. My chest tightened, but instead of breaking down, I felt a fierce clarity settle inside me. I could see the edges of his control cracking. He leaned closer to the laptop, muttering under his breath, "This isn't happening, this isn't happening." But it was, and the company chat made it undeniable. Within moments, someone tagged his supervisor. I felt my breath catch as I watched the chain of reactions unfold. Messages from managers began appearing, carefully worded questions. "Mark, can you clarify? Is this accurate? Please confirm your location for this evening." Each ping of notification added weight to the situation. He stammered, tried to redirect, but the evidence was clear, irrefutable. I noticed him glancing at me, desperation in his eyes. "Ursula, stop this. Please. I can explain." I shook my head slowly, feeling the calmness of resolve. "You've had months to explain your actions, Mark. Now, the explanation is visible to everyone. It's out in the open. You don't get to control it anymore." He sank into a chair, shoulders slumping as if he had been carrying the weight of his lies for a long time and had finally reached the breaking point. I realized in that moment that exposure wasn't just a punishment, it was liberation. For him, perhaps a form of reckoning. For me, finally, the end of the suffocating uncertainty. The chat continued to flood. Screenshots circulated. Some coworkers reacted with disbelief, others with outrage, a few with sympathy toward me. The live stream had become an unintentional courtroom, the evidence undeniable, and the audience engaged in real time. Mark was no longer the confident, charming professional everyone admired. He was the man on screen, caught in layers of personal and professional deception. He tried one last plea, standing abruptly. "You don't understand the consequences. You'll ruin everything for both of us." I watched him, heart steady, feeling a strange mix of pity and resolve. "No, Mark," I said softly, "I won't ruin anything. You've been doing that yourself. I'm only revealing what's already there." I could see his lips trembling slightly, the panic growing as the stream continued to play, highlighting every interaction, every glance, every subtle smile. The intimate conversation, the gestures, the casual comfort. Everything was on display, undeniable, and public in a way he hadn't foreseen. I realized then that this wasn't just exposure. It was a mirror. a reflection of truth he could no longer deny. And for me, it was strangely cathartic. I didn't feel the bitterness that comes from petty revenge. I felt clarity. I felt the power of truth, unfiltered, undeniable, and free. Mark slumped lower, his breathing quickening as he realized the magnitude of the situation. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, watching the live stream, the chat, and the unraveling of the illusion he had built. Every ping from the chat reminded me that this was real. Every notification reinforced that deception has consequences. And as I sat there, the weight of months of lies lifting from my shoulders, I understood something vital. This moment wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about shaming him or humiliating him for the sake of satisfaction. It was about reclaiming control over my own life and ensuring that truth, however painful, was seen, acknowledged, and honored. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. I simply sat in quiet resolve, feeling the calm strength of someone who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. The live stream continued in the background, Mark's panic visible, the messages still rolling in. The room smelled faintly of chamomile from the cup I had long since abandoned, and the house was quiet except for the faint tapping of fingers on the keyboard and the low hum of the laptop. It was finally over. For now, at least, the lies beneath the surface had been fully exposed, and there was no going back to ignorance. The house felt heavier that evening. The living room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single lamp on the end table. The laptop sat open, the screen still displaying the live stream from the restaurant. Though Mark's panic had long since quieted, he had retreated to the kitchen, pacing, muttering to himself in low, fragmented sentences. I didn't rush him. I allowed him space, letting the tension swell naturally, knowing that when he finally noticed my resolve, he wouldn't be able to deflect or manipulate as he had before. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth barely registering as I observed him. His movements were sharp, jerky, as though the weight of being caught had finally sunk in. He wasn't looking at me, though I could see the corners of his eyes flick toward my face every few seconds, measuring, calculating, wondering how much I knew. It was a dangerous mix of fear and disbelief, and I knew in that instant that the confrontation I had never planned was already forming in the room between us. Mark finally stopped moving and leaned against the kitchen counter, folding his arms. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than before, tinged with desperation. "Ursula, we need to talk." I didn't answer immediately. I sipped my tea, letting the steam curl up toward my face, allowing a moment of silence to stretch, the kind of silence that makes every word afterward impossible to ignore. I could feel my own heartbeat echoing in my chest, steady but alert, ready for the storm of emotions I knew was coming. He stepped closer. "Please, I can explain everything. I didn't mean for—" I set the cup down slowly, careful not to shatter it against the table. My hands were calm, unshaking, though my mind was anything but— "Explain," I asked softly, the word carrying the weight of months of disbelief, suspicion, and silent anguish. "Mark, do you really think there's an explanation for what everyone just saw?" His face flickered with a brief flash of panic. He opened his mouth, then closed it, searching for a story that wouldn't crumble under the evidence now saturating our lives. He finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. You have to believe me." I took a step back, letting the distance between us stretch, giving both of us the space to breathe, yet not enough to allow him an escape. "Believe you? Do you know how many little lies I've seen, Mark? How many excuses I swallowed because I trusted you? And every one of them led here, to this moment, to this truth." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. His usual confident demeanor was gone. replaced by a trembling vulnerability he had never shown me. I didn't want anyone to find out, he said, almost pleading. It wasn't meant to get this big. Not meant to get this big. I echoed, disbelief sharp in my voice. You mean to get caught? Or to keep building lies and pretending like nothing was wrong while you lived a double life? He flinched, as though I had struck him. I didn't soften my words. I had waited too long to be gentle. Mark, do you realize what you've done to me? To us? Every word, every little fabrication. It wasn't harmless. It was manipulation. And now it's out. Every person who knows you, every person who trusted you, has seen it. He moved closer again, almost begging. Ursula, you don't understand. If this spreads, my job, my reputation, everything I've worked for. I cut him off, my voice calm, but filled with the power of my decision. You don't get to make that about you. Not anymore. Not when you've hurt me this way for months. Not when the lies beneath the surface have been building while I tried to believe in us. His shoulders sagged, and he ran both hands over his face, a gesture of frustration, shame, and helplessness all at once. He looked exhausted, and for a moment I almost felt sympathy. Almost. But the betrayal was too deep. The truth was too clear. I couldn't allow that fleeting pity to soften the steel that had formed inside me. I didn't think you'd find out, he said, voice broken. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could fix it before it got too late. I asked, voice rising slightly more from the emotion that had been simmering than anger alone. Mark, it's too late. You've been managing it for months. And in doing so, you've built a life of lies around us. Around me. And now you're realizing, too late, that lies have consequences. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with unshed emotion. I'm sorry, Ursula. I didn't know. I didn't think. Don't, I interrupted, raising a hand. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for explanations. I'm asking you to see me, to see what you've done. He took a step back, as though the words physically hit him. I watched his chest rise and fall, each breath heavy with the weight of understanding he had tried so long to avoid. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the laptop and the ticking clock on the wall. I realized in that moment that the confrontation I had never planned wasn't about yelling or slamming doors. It was about this, allowing truth and acknowledgement to exist in the same space without distortion. I watched everything, Mark, I said softly, almost whispering now, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The dinners, the messages, the little smiles, the hand touches. I've cataloged it all. I've documented it. I know the patterns, and I know who you've been outside this house while pretending to be present inside it. His face went pale, and he shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath. Ursula, this isn't fair. You're making it worse. I'm not making it worse, I said. You did this to yourself. You built the deception, layer by layer, thinking no one would notice. You believed I would be blind to the truth. And now the truth exists, Mark. It exists whether you like it or not. He slumped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't know what to do. I messed up. Everything. I took a careful step closer, standing over him, my gaze firm but not cruel. Mark, you need to understand something. This isn't about punishment. It's not about revenge. It's about recognition, about acknowledging that your choices, every single one of them, have consequences. And you've reached a point where the consequences are undeniable. He lifted his head, eyes red and glistening with tears. Ursula, I love you. I always did. I shook my head slowly, the words heavy on my tongue but necessary. Love doesn't excuse deception. Mark, it doesn't justify betrayal. You had months to honor our relationship. Instead, you chose to build a hidden life while pretending everything was fine. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't mean—" "You did hurt me," I said calmly, almost sadly. "Every single day I believed your lies, every little story you told to cover up the truth. It was a wound, Mark. And now, after all this, you finally have to face it." He closed his eyes, leaning back in the chair, shaking slightly. For the first time in years, I saw him without the armor of charm, without the mask of confidence. He was human, vulnerable, exposed, and he had no words left that could repair what he had broken. I felt an unexpected surge of clarity, anger, yes, but also relief. Relief that the confrontation had happened without chaos, without screaming, without physical fights. Just the raw, unavoidable acknowledgement of truth. I moved to the couch and sat down, leaving him standing, letting the silence do its work. He sat again, defeated, staring at the floor. I knew he would try to explain more, to rationalize, to twist details, but I was done listening to rationalizations. I had seen the evidence, documented the lies, and understood the full scope. Nothing more needed to be said. And yet, for all the calm resolve, a small part of me ached. I remembered the early days of our marriage, the soft laughter, the quiet intimacy we had shared. The contrast between that past and the present felt like a wound reopening, but I didn't let it overwhelm me. I reminded myself that acknowledgement, true confrontation, was the first step to closure. Hours passed. Mark tried to speak several more times, his voice cracking, faltering. I listened, only occasionally nodding. Each attempt to deflect or manipulate fell flat. The live stream, the documented evidence, and the undeniable truth loomed over us like a weight neither of us could ignore. Finally, he leaned back completely, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Ursula, I don't know if I can fix this," he admitted, voice small, almost childlike in its honesty. I took a deep breath, feeling the room settle. "You won't," I said softly, "and I don't want you to. But now, we can start from the truth. That's the only place to begin." For the first time in months, I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen, slightly. The confrontation I had never planned had arrived on its own. It was raw, messy, emotional, and yet necessary. It was the moment where truth, acknowledgement, and accountability intersected, and nothing could erase it. And in that quiet aftermath, as Mark sat slumped and exhausted, I realized sometimes confrontation doesn't require planning. Sometimes it simply requires the courage to face reality and refuse to let lies continue their quiet, invisible damage. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt different. It wasn't the tension that had hung over it for months, nor the suffocating uncertainty I had lived with for weeks. No, this morning carried something else, something heavier yet strangely liberating, clarity. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, dust particles floating in the warm beams, illuminating the quiet living room where Mark still slept on the couch, head bowed, defeated. I moved quietly through the space, careful not to disturb him, but aware that I would no longer be defined by his presence or his lies. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the aroma grounding me in the simple rhythm of morning. There was a strange comfort in routine now, in small actions that required no deception, no pretenses. I took my mug to the window and leaned against the sill, looking out at the street below. Neighbors were moving through their morning rituals, mail being collected, cars starting, dogs walking eagerly. Life continuing with an ordinary grace I hadn't noticed while trapped in the web of betrayal. I realized with a small but profound shock that life could feel ordinary again and still feel precious. I decided to take a walk, the crisp air hitting my face as I stepped outside. Each breath felt sharper, cleaner, as if I were inhaling freedom itself. Mark remained inside, and I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. The confrontation had drawn a line I couldn't unsee, couldn't unexperience. The truth had been laid bare, and now the world I chose to inhabit had to be mine, independent of him. As I walked through the quiet neighborhood, I reflected on the past months, the intricate patterns of deception, and the slow, almost imperceptible realization that he was living a double life. It was a truth that had hurt me, reshaped me, and ultimately forced me to confront parts of myself I had long ignored, the parts that had tolerated small lies, overlooked inconsistencies, and rationalized behavior for the sake of love. I had been patient once too long, forgiving once too often. But now, the patience and forgiveness had transformed into awareness and choice. Returning home, I opened my laptop and revisited the screenshots, the messages, the live stream recordings. I didn't do this to dwell on pain. I did it to remind myself of the clarity I had gained, the knowledge I had claimed as my own. Each line, each captured moment, was a marker of my own awakening. The past no longer controlled me. It simply existed as a reference point for the life I was choosing to lead. Mark stirred on the couch, muttering under his breath. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Our confrontation had been a turning point, and now the silent acknowledgement between us carried more weight than any argument could. He knew I had the upper hand, not in power, but in understanding. He knew that whatever came next would not be dictated by him, by his excuses, or by his attempts at manipulation. In the following days, I began small acts of reclamation. I rearranged furniture, reorganized my personal spaces, and even started a little journal in which I documented thoughts, goals, and intentions. Each entry, no matter how mundane, felt like a declaration of independence. I wasn't running from Mark or the betrayal. I was walking toward a self-defined existence, one built on transparency, honesty, and the quiet dignity of being in control of my own life. Friends began noticing a subtle change. Invitations to lunch, phone calls filled with laughter, and quiet evenings spent in conversation all reminded me that the world outside my house and outside my pain was still alive and accessible. I laughed more freely than I had in months. I allowed myself to feel joy, cautiously at first, then more openly. The contrast between the woman who had been trapped in suspicion and the woman who now embraced autonomy was stark, almost shocking in its clarity. One afternoon, I sat with my best friend, Sarah, at our favorite cafe. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting a warm glow over the table. We sipped tea, watching people pass by, and I realized I was talking openly about Mark in a way I never had before, not to relive pain, but to process it. I shared moments from the confrontation, my steps in uncovering the lies, and my emotional reckoning with the live stream. Sarah listened carefully, nodding, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze mine. "Ursula," she said softly, "you're not just surviving this. You're taking back your life. That's more powerful than you realize." Her words resonated deep within me. I understood now that choosing life after betrayal wasn't about erasing the past or pretending nothing had happened. It was about integrating it into a narrative in which I was the protagonist, the one with agency and voice. The betrayal remained a part of my story, yes, but it no longer dictated the plot. I did. Back home, I began exploring new routines. I took up long walks in nearby parks, discovering hidden trails and quiet benches I had never noticed before. I started small creative projects, writing short reflections, sketching, even learning a few basic photography techniques to capture the subtle beauty of ordinary days. Each act was an assertion. I was alive, present, and no longer constrained by deception. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples, I realized I hadn't felt fear for hours. Not for Mark, not for the past, not for the unknown. There was a serenity in acknowledgement, in seeing the truth and refusing to be enslaved by it. I lit a candle, letting the flickering light cast moving shadows across the walls, and felt a sense of quiet triumph, not over him, but over the paralysis of doubt and betrayal. Of course, moments of doubt crept in occasionally. Small reminders, his voice, an unanswered message, the echo of his presence in rooms we had shared, would stir anxiety. But now I met those moments with conscious awareness rather than panic. I allowed the feelings to exist, acknowledged them, and then returned to the steady rhythm of my reclaimed life. Each challenge became a test of resilience, a quiet reinforcement that I had chosen strength over victimhood. I also began reflecting on the professional consequences of his exposure, the ripple effects of the live stream on colleagues and work relationships. It wasn't vengeance I sought, it was clarity. I reached out to a few colleagues privately, checking on their well-being after the shock, offering support for any discomfort caused by the unexpected revelation. These small gestures reminded me that accountability and compassion could coexist, even in the aftermath of betrayal. As weeks turned into months, the house transformed alongside me. The spaces that once carried tension now held warmth. Photos of friends, small decorations I had set aside, and organized shelves reflected a life being consciously rebuilt. I wasn't erasing the past. I was framing it, placing it in context so it no longer dominated the present. I also re-examined my relationships. Some friendships had deepened, strengthened by honesty and shared empathy. Others had drifted, unable or unwilling to adjust to the new boundaries I had set. And that was okay. Part of choosing life after the truth meant allowing only those who respected integrity and personal growth into the circles I cherished. One quiet evening, I walked to the nearby lake, the water reflecting the moonlight like silver shards scattered across a dark canvas. Sitting on a bench, I thought of Mark, not with anger, not with longing, but with a calm acceptance. The confrontation, the live stream, the months of lies, they were all behind me now. The weight of betrayal remained a faint echo, but it no longer threatened to drown me. I was free to choose my path, and freedom was its own kind of triumph. I began to notice small joys I had overlooked before. The smell of rain on asphalt, the soft chirping of crickets, the laughter of children playing nearby. Life's ordinary beauty became extraordinary simply because I was fully present, no longer clouded by fear or suspicion. Each sensory detail reinforced the reality that I was alive, whole, and moving forward. In time, I also discovered a new confidence in my interactions with others. Conversations were more authentic, decisions more deliberate, and boundaries stronger. I didn't seek approval or validation from Mark or anyone who had witnessed the betrayal. I no longer measured my worth by his actions or anyone else's perception. The truth had liberated me in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were still moments of reflection, quiet introspection that sometimes stung with memory. But rather than feeling paralyzed, I embraced these moments as opportunities for growth. Journaling, meditation, and deep conversations with trusted friends became rituals that strengthened my resilience. I realized that choosing life after the truth wasn't a single act. It was a continuous practice, a conscious commitment to self-respect, integrity, and emotional clarity. Months later, I stood in the kitchen one morning, sunlight streaming across the counters, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. Mark had moved out quietly, and while his absence was still a presence in some ways, it no longer held power over me. I poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched life unfold outside. Birds flitted from branch to branch. Neighbors greeted each other warmly. Children ran past, laughing, and I smiled, a full, unguarded smile. The life I chose after the truth was not about perfection or erasing the past. It was about embracing reality with courage, acknowledging pain without allowing it to define me, and building a world in which honesty, integrity, and self-respect guided my decisions. I realized finally that this life, ordinary, real, human, was exactly what I had been searching for all along. And as I sipped my coffee, the warmth grounding me in the present, I understood something vital. Truth may hurt, betrayal may sting, but the life you choose after confronting it is a testament to your strength, resilience, and capacity to reclaim joy, independence, and dignity. As I sit here now, the quiet hum of the house surrounding me, I realize that life after betrayal isn't defined by a single dramatic moment or confrontation. It's defined by the small choices we make each day, choosing honesty over lies, choosing presence over avoidance, choosing ourselves when the world has tried to convince us otherwise. I think back to the live stream, the confrontation, the sleepless nights spent unraveling truths I never wanted to face. And yet, even in the pain of discovery, there was a strange clarity, a light cutting through the shadow of doubt that had held me captive for so long. I understand now that those moments of heartbreak were not the end of me. They were the catalysts that forced me to see the world and myself with unflinching eyes. The pain was real, the betrayal deep, but it was never the measure of my worth or my capacity to rebuild. I have learned to find beauty in ordinary days. The way sunlight hits the kitchen counter in the morning, the comforting aroma of coffee brewing, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind outside my window. These simple, ordinary moments, which I once overlooked, have become my sanctuary, reminders that life is not only about monumental events or dramatic revelations, but about the quiet resilience that allows us to keep moving forward. I no longer seek validation from those who failed to respect me, and I no longer allow the ghosts of the past to dictate my emotions. Every step I take now is grounded in awareness, honesty, and the unwavering understanding that I am responsible for my own peace. Freedom, I've discovered, is not simply walking away from someone who has hurt you. It's the ability to reclaim every aspect of your life that was overshadowed by their lies. It's the courage to live openly, fully, and unapologetically in your own truth. There are still echoes of sadness, of loss, and occasionally of longing, but they no longer control me. They exist only as reminders of what I endured, what I overcame, and the strength that has been forged through the fire of betrayal. I have built a life that is mine, not dictated by fear, not held hostage by deceit, but guided by clarity and self-respect. And so, as the evening light fades and the quiet settles in around me, I feel a profound sense of completion. The confrontation, the exposure, the unraveling of lies, all of it has led me here to a life shaped by conscious choices, emotional resilience, and the unwavering knowledge that truth, no matter how painful, is always the foundation upon which a meaningful life is built. I have learned that betrayal does not define us. It reveals us. And what it has revealed in me is a capacity for courage, for self-discovery, and for a peace I never thought possible. This is the life I chose after the truth. And in choosing it, I have finally, fully reclaimed myself.